Have you ever witnessed a moment so disrespectful, so painfully arrogant, that the entire room didn't just fall silent? It collapsed in on itself, where even the air felt heavier, as if everyone present suddenly realized they were watching something they were not supposed to see? That's exactly what unfolded in Moscow. On a cold March afternoon when frost still clung to the stadium windows, and the world's top fighters had gathered under blinding white lights for what was supposed to be a simple press conference. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Translators whispered into headsets as tension crackled like static. And then, Russia's most feared Sambo champion, a man unbeaten for over a decade, a man whose name alone could silence a room, decided to humiliate a Filipino fighter in front of an audience big enough to echo across continents. He didn't just mock him, he dismantled him verbally, piece by piece, with the confidence of someone who believed he was beyond challenge, beyond defeat, beyond even the possibility of being wrong. But what no one in that vast arena understood, not the reporters scribbling notes, not the fans waving flags, not even the coaches standing backstage, was that history was about to flip itself upside down, because the man they laughed at, the man they dismissed as small, irrelevant, and not worthy of being in the same ring, was carrying something far heavier than size or reputation. He carried a legacy, a skill set honed through centuries, a warrior tradition the world had forgotten, but was about to remember in the loudest way possible, and within weeks he would deliver one of the most shocking upsets the combat world had ever witnessed. Not through brute strength, not through height or muscle or fame, but through a fighting system most people didn't even believe was real. A style built not in gyms, but in history, not designed for sport, but for survival. What happened next didn't just change one fighter's fate, it changed perceptions, nations, and the very definition of what a real martial art could be. And it all began with one insult that went too far. The Luzhniki sports complex buzzed with excitement, that thick, electric kind of energy that fills a room before something historic happens, even if nobody knows it yet. Bright overhead lights cast long shadows across rows of fighters seated behind polished tables. Heavy banners, Russian sponsors, global brands, fight organizations hung from the walls like towering flags of dominance. Dozens of athletes sat stiffly in their chairs, hands folded, eyes forward, each hoping for a headline moment. Reporters leaned in aggressively, microphones outstretched like weapons, ready to snatch quotes that might spark tomorrow's news cycle. The sound of clicking cameras felt like distant rain. Then, the Philippine representative rose to his feet. A hush spread across his side of the platform. "Introducing our fighter," he announced, voice steady but underscored with pride. "Trained in traditional Filipino martial arts, KaliEskrima." A few polite nods followed. A couple of journalists typed the names quietly, as if unsure how to even spell them. To most of the room, these arts were curiosities, mentioned occasionally in documentaries, demonstrated at cultural festivals, but never taken seriously on a global stage built for giants. Then came the moment. Dmitry Volkov, the undefeated 6'4" Sambo monster, broad shoulders stretching the seams of his track jacket, jawline sharp as a carved statue, leaned back in his chair. His eyes narrowed, his lips twitched, and then he unleashed a laugh so loud, so mocking, so dripping with superiority, that conversations around the hall cut off mid-sentence. Reporters stopped writing. Cameras refocused on him instantly. Dmitry wiped tears from the corners of his eyes, still shaking with amusement. "Filipino martial arts?" he repeated, deliberately louder this time. "You mean stick dancing?" A few reporters chuckled, trying to hide their amusement behind notepads. Others smirked into their cameras, knowing the clip would go viral. Dmitri wasn't finished. He pushed himself up from his seat, towering above everyone like a monument of confidence. "With all respect," he said, the kind of respect that carried the opposite meaning. "This is a combat event. We are fighters, not performers. Send him home before he gets hurt." The murmurs started immediately. Soft at first, then growing. A ripple of embarrassment swept through the hall, not just for the Philippines, but for the lone fighter sitting quietly at the far end of the table. His name was Arvin Delgado. 5'7", compact but composed, the kind of man who didn't fill a room with presence, but filled moments with meaning. No flashy muscles, no dramatic expressions, just calm, observant eyes, the eyes of someone who had been underestimated his entire life and had learned to turn underestimation into power. Arvin didn't shift in his seat. He didn't glare back. He didn't even blink faster. He simply inhaled, exhaled, and stood up slowly, bowing his head with humility that felt almost ancient. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried enough weight to freeze every moving part of the room. "Mr. Volkov," he began, "if you believe Filipino martial arts are a joke, will you fight me?" A reporter dropped his pen. A camera operator whispered, "What did he say?" Arvin continued, unwavering. "Not in an exhibition. A real match." The room stopped breathing. Dmitri's posture stiffened. His grin returned, the grin of a man who believed he had just been handed an easy victory on a silver platter. "You?" he said, stepping closer, towering, looming. "Against me." A beat of silence. "Fine," he snarled. "I'll finish you in one round." The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, laughter, shocked murmurs, and just like that, with one challenge and one arrogant acceptance, a fight nobody expected, nobody requested, and nobody believed would be competitive, became the fight the entire world would soon be talking about. The kind of fight that doesn't just fill arenas, it rewrites legacies. 6 weeks later, the air in Moscow felt different, sharper, colder, as if the city itself knew that something unforgettable was about to unfold. Inside the massive arena, 12,000 fans packed themselves shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising like a storm trapped indoors. The sound wasn't just loud, it vibrated, echoing through metal beams and concrete pillars as though the entire building had a heartbeat. Russian flags waved proudly across the stands, red, white, and blue, rippling under the spotlights like waves in an ocean of certainty. This was supposed to be a celebration, a display of national dominance, a night where a giant humbled an outsider in front of a home crowd hungry for victory. Commentators repeated the same lines with the confidence of men reading a script that had already been written. "This won't last long. He's too small. Filipino martial arts are outdated." Their voices carried an almost lazy certainty, the kind that comes when results are considered inevitable. Then the arena lights shifted. A low bass rang through the speakers, and Dmitri Volkov emerged. Wrapped in national pride and surrounded by a small army of cornermen, he stepped toward the cage as if he owned the ground beneath him. He slapped his chest, raised both arms, and the crowd erupted in a roar that shook the rafters. He was undefeated, unchallenged, untouchable, a man built from stone and expectation. He had crushed world-class fighters. Tonight, in his mind, he would crush another. But across the arena, in the opposite tunnel, walked a very different figure. No entourage, no flashing lights, no music announcing his arrival. Just Arvin Delgado, walking forward with a calmness that didn't match the chaos around him. He wore no dramatic expression, no gloves raised high, no smirk, no swagger. Only a single, small patch of the Philippine flag on his chest. A quiet symbol of a culture the world had underestimated one too many times. Each step he took seemed to make the arena quieter, as if the noise dimmed slightly, not out of respect, but confusion. Who walks alone into a lion's den? Someone whispered from the audience. Who carries no army behind him? Arvin did. Because he didn't need an army. He carried something else. A lineage, a legacy, less visible but far heavier. Just before the bell, his coach, a 68-year-old Kali master named Lolo Ernesto, whose hands bore the scars of decades spent training with blades, leaned in close. His voice was soft but sharp enough to cut through Arvin's nerves. "Remember," he whispered, "they see a stick fighter." A slow breath, a pause. "Show them a warrior." Arvin nodded once, a subtle gesture, but powerful in its simplicity, and lifted his hands. Across the cage, Dmitry Volkov rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and smirked. Two men, two worlds, two histories colliding. The crowd roared again, but Arvin heard none of it. All he heard was the wisdom of generations echoing in Lolo Ernesto's voice. All he felt was the weight of his flag, and all he prepared to do was prove the world wrong with the one language every fighter understands: combat. The bell rang. Dmitry exploded forward with the confidence of a man who had crushed giants. Heavy jabs, thundering leg kicks, a takedown attempt that slammed Arvin into the canvas. Commentators cheered, "This is over!" But then, something strange happened. Every time Dmitry advanced position, Arvin slipped away as if his body was made of water. Not Brazilian jiu-jitsu movements, not Sambo counters. Something else, something angular, precise, unpredictable. Kali footwork, Eskrima redirections, blade fighting principles applied to grappling. Dmitry tried a signature overhand right, a punch that had ended careers. Arvin moved barely half an inch, and the fist cut through empty space. Then came the first shock. Arvin's hands blurred. Hammer fist to the nerve, elbow to the ribs, palm strike under the jaw. Not wild strikes, engineered strikes. Dmitry stumbled back, shaking his right arm as if it had gone numb. The crowd fell silent. Eskrima had a name for this. Defanging the snake. Disable the limb. Neutralize the weapon. Break the offense at its source. Round one ended. For the first time in years, Dmitry Volkov returned to his corner, confused. "These movements, I can't read them," he muttered. The laugh from the press conference was long gone. Dmitry came out slower now. Gone was the swagger, the casual dominance of a man who believed himself invincible. His footwork, once heavy with confidence, had become cautious, probing, unsure. But it didn't matter, because Arvin had already solved him. Every step Dmitry took, Arvin had already answered. Every shift in weight, every twitch of muscle, every angle of attack. Arvin read them like pages in a book he had studied his entire life. Dmitry tried to close distance. Arvin pivoted effortlessly. Dmitry tried to feint. Arvin slipped into a new line of movement before the feint even finished. It wasn't speed, it wasn't luck, it was timing. The kind of timing only a blade fighter learns, where one wrong angle doesn't mean losing a point, it means losing your life. Arvin struck first, not hard, not flashy, but with cold, calculated purpose. He targeted the nerve clusters along Dmitry's thigh, landing precision low kicks that didn't look powerful but carried centuries of science behind them. After the third kick, Dmitry's stance buckled. His lead leg trembled, a signal to anyone trained in Eskrima that the weapon base was beginning to fail. Then came the arm. Arvin slipped inside a punch, his movement so small the cameras barely caught it, and hammered the radial nerve just below Dmitry's bicep. The reaction was immediate. His power hand shuddered, fingers twitching involuntarily as numbness shot down the forearm. The crowd didn't understand, but Dmitri did. His eyes widened in panic for the first time in his career. Arvin fought him as if Dmitri were holding a blade, entering with minimal motion, cutting angles with surgical precision, exiting before any counter could begin. It was ancient, efficient, predatory. A fighting system designed not for points or sport, but for ending threats in jungle terrain and war zones. Then came the moment that broke the internet. Dmitri, frustrated, desperate, and running out of functioning limbs, spun with all his weight, launching a wide, powerful backfist meant to end the fight instantly. Any normal fighter would have retreated. Arvin did not. He stepped in, straight into the danger, closing the gap so precisely that the strike lost all leverage. And there, in the narrow window between Dmitri's extension and recoil, Arvin delivered a perfect gunting counter. A hammer fist precisely into the soft interior of Dmitri's extended elbow joint. The sound, a sharp, sickening crack, echoed through the arena like a snapped bamboo rod. Dmitri screamed, dropping to one knee, his arm instantly limp, hanging like dead weight at his side. The arena gasped in one collective breath, a sound of disbelief, fear, and awe. Even the commentators, seasoned veterans of countless fights, could only whisper, What is this style? How is he doing this? This isn't MMA. This is something else." And they were right. This wasn't luck. This wasn't trickery. This was Filipino martial science. The physiology, timing, angles, and destructive precision built through generations of real combat. Executed by a man the world had dismissed, a warrior they had mocked, a culture they had underestimated. But in that moment, with a single devastating strike, Arvin Delgado didn't just injure a champion. He rewrote the rules of the fight. And the world could finally see it. Dmitri refused to quit. Even with one arm hanging lifelessly at his side, he staggered back to his feet. Eyes wild, teeth clenched, breathing like a wounded animal cornered with no escape. His pride wouldn't allow surrender. His ego wouldn't allow retreat. His entire identity, years of victories, decades of dominance, an empire of fear built on his name, would not let him fall quietly. And so he charged, not with technique, not with strategy, but with pure desperation, twisting his body to generate power from the only arm he could still move. Arvin didn't flinch. Instead, he bowed his head. A small, humble gesture, a warrior's respect offered even to an opponent blinded by pride. It was the calm before the storm, the exhale before the strike, the final act of honor before delivering the inevitable. Arvin stepped forward. Left hook. Sharp, compact, a shot that snapped Dmitri's head to the side and froze him mid-charge. Right knee, driven clean into the ribs, forcing a painful grunt from Dmitri's lungs and folding his frame for just one heartbeat. And then the finishing blow. A spinning elbow, an Eskrima finishing pattern, crafted from blade combat, perfected through generations, now adapted for empty-hand warfare in the cage. Arvin turned with precision, hips aligned, shoulders rotating like a coiled spring released, and the elbow landed with the dull, sickening crack of stone striking wood. The impact echoed across the arena. Dmitri Volkov, the undefeated Russian champion, the man who mocked a nation, the fighter who believed himself untouchable, collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully, but instantly, as if someone had cut the strings of a giant puppet. His knees gave way, his body crumpled, his head hit the canvas with finality. Silence fell, a heavy, haunting silence, as if the entire arena had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. For one long, suspended moment, 12,000 people stared at the impossible. Then, shock, gasps, hands over mouths, cameras scrambling to focus. And finally, an eruption of disbelief so powerful that the sound rolled through the stadium like a tidal wave. Some fans stood frozen, Others shouted, others simply stared, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A giant had fallen, a legacy had shattered, and a forgotten warrior tradition had just announced itself to the world with a strike heard across nations. Within just 48 hours, the world had changed. The knockout replay spread like wildfire, shared on sports pages, reaction channels, MMA forums, and Filipino communities across the globe. 50 million views, a number so large even major networks began covering it. Filipino martial arts exploded across social media, trending in countries that had barely even heard of Kali or Eskrima before. Analysts, some skeptical, some stunned, began slowing down the footage frame by frame. They circled Arvin's angles, measured his foot placement, mapped out the lines of attack, as if deciphering ancient military strategy. How did a smaller fighter dismantle a giant? How did traditional martial arts outperform modern systems? What did the world miss? Questions poured in. Experts scrambled to answer. And the old stereotypes that Filipino martial arts were relics, cultural performances, or outdated techniques began to crumble. Gyms in the US, Brazil, Europe, and the Middle East began calling Filipino instructors, asking for seminars, workshops, anything that could help them understand the mysterious efficiency they had just witnessed. For the first time in modern combat sports, the world looked at KaliEskrima not as stick dancing, not as something exotic or ornamental, but as one of the most scientific, adaptable, and brutally efficient combat systems ever created. A system built on angles, timing, biomechanics, and anatomical precision, the kind that doesn't just attack an opponent, it disassembles him. And then came the moment that shocked people even more than the knockout. Dmitry Volkov, the man once celebrated as untouchable, the man who mocked an entire martial tradition, quietly flew to the Philippines months after his defeat. No press conference, no cameras, just humility. He traveled to a humble training hall in the province where Arvin's coach, the elderly Kali master Lolo Ernesto, had trained generations of fighters long before social media or fame existed. Dmitry bowed before him, a gesture that stunned everyone present. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice lower, steadier, carrying the weight of a man who had finally learned a truth his arrogance once blinded him to. "I thought I understood fighting, but I had only learned half the world's knowledge." He stayed for weeks, trained with sticks, learned empty-hand principles, studied angles and timing as if rebuilding his entire fighting identity from the ground up. And in that small, sunlit training hall, between old wooden dummies and sweat-worn mats, he discovered something that champions often forget. There is always more to learn. There is always a deeper system. And sometimes the strongest warriors come from the traditions the world ignores. Arvin Delgado didn't win because he was stronger, or taller, or favored. He won because he carried a legacy that survived colonizers, warfare, and centuries of survival. A legacy born from blades, perfected through necessity, and preserved through generations. Filipino martial arts were never folklore. They were never outdated. They were never weak. They were simply waiting for the world to see them again. Sometimes the loudest warrior is not the strongest, just the noisiest. And sometimes the quietest fighter carries an entire heritage in his hands. A heritage that is impossible to stop when precision, timing, and heart work together. This was not just a fight. This was a reminder. Never underestimate a Filipino. Never underestimate tradition. Never underestimate the warrior the world refuses to see until it's too late.